So welcome officially again to Thrive, Lead, Succeed. I'm your host, Sandi Hokansson, Executive Coach and CEO of Sound Leadership. Today we're going to discuss tips to lead a high growth organization. And we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Victoria Sopik. She is CEO of Kids & Company. I've known Victoria for approximately 12 years. We met as we were both members of the Young Presidents Organization. And she's a woman who does it all. And you're going to hear from her today. She's a true entrepreneur, and she will tell you stories, maybe not today, but she will tell you stories of even as a young girl growing up and young woman with her first entrepreneurial attempts and successes. She's a very successful businesswoman. She's been recognized with numerous prestigious awards, and she is, on top of that, the mother of 8 children. When her and her partner, her business partner, set up Kids & Company in 2002, they didn't really, I think that it was going to grow as fast as it has over the last 18 years, as they have successfully spearheaded this organization. So she's got a lot of value to share with us on this topic, and I'm thrilled to have her with us today. So welcome, Victoria.
Thank you, Sandi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
That's great. Thank you. I just looked, I'm sitting at my desk in my office that I'm almost never in because I'm usually out on the road visiting our childcare centers. And I noticed I had a plaque from the organization we joined together 2006. So it's been 14 years. Crazy.
14
how time
years.
flies.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That is.
So normally I wouldn't know, just right beside me. So thank you for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we'll get started, and I couldn't think of a better leader than you to talk about this. And a lot of people, don't have the experience, the entrepreneurial experience to kind of to do what you've done, but they could be even in, large enterprise organizations, and they're still looking for that double-digit growth, and they still would either desire to have that, or they can find themselves, successfully having that for a couple of years in a row, and the dynamic of the organization changes and the speed of the organization changes. So we're really looking for a great conversation today on this topic. So let's first talk about some definitions around the term, because for us today, just for us today. So how do you define a high growth organization?
Thanks, Sandi. So, I thought, as you say, I am the perfect person for this topic because I chose to grow a sort of type of organization that's not typically high growth. And so it's been, a huge challenge, lots of good learning. And what I was going to say, from the outset is I've also done lots of all different types of, business management, leadership learning. And I find, if I take away one or two really sort of key small points from anything I do that help me, become better at what I'm doing, it's great. So I will touch, as you say, on lots of different things, and I do speak quickly. Let me know if I get going too fast. But I think that so much of what, as I was reflecting before our chat, so much of what I've learned would be applicable even to organizations which are not high growth, and I will sort of highlight those, but definitely my journey is one of such. So just to give you a bit of background, and so when I say define high growth, for sure double-digit growth. So anything, more than 15 or 20% growth would be. We were, the fastest growing company in Canada in 2012. I think it was 5,000% that we had grown over the last 5 years. We were on the cover of Profit magazine. It might have been a lot more than that, but it was a huge number. And the reason that I say we're so unusual is that typical childcare center, which are like preschools or nursery schools, some people might think of, they're typically mom and pop owned, and, a couple or a mother with their, who has a teacher will start a childcare center, and they may have one, they may have 2 or 3, but certainly, we have about 125, and we're by far the largest in Canada. So we chose to take something that had not been grown in Canada and grow it. And so lots of learning from that, because we couldn't even copy. It's not like we could copy another retailer or another group and sort of pay attention to what we had done. We had to learn it on our own, of which we did learn lots.
Yes, and it sounds like you disrupted that industry fairly well, given that there wasn't a model for that kind of growth in that industry. So tell me about that. So how does a leader then go about building a high growth organization? Like, how did you set out, like, tell us a little bit about what you did.
No, and thank you. And so just to clarify for people, Kids and Company is corporate childcare. So we have childcare centers, in all different locations, typically Class A office buildings, but they could be standalone. And so they're like a little tiny school with 100 children and a director or a principal. And those are the people that run our business. And so we had to figure out a way to manage those so important people that, are for all the way from Langford, BC, we're in Boston, we're in Nova Scotia. We had to figure out a way to manage them from afar, head office in Richmond Hill, and have them hugely successful. And so the number one thing, of course, is, deciding we were going to grow. And so I think that's my first takeaway is, like, understand what you're up to. If you're on a slow growth or a low growth or a no growth, understand what it is. And because that will really define what you need. So for us, because we knew we were, and so the reason, just to come back again a tiny bit, the reason we were going to be a fast growth company is we're providing childcare to corporations. They are everywhere. So we knew in order to get a corporate client, we couldn't just say, okay, well, we're just opening here in, downtown Toronto. They would say, what about Ottawa? What about Montreal? So we knew we had to quickly scale. And so that was sort of our reason for being, was to scale quickly. It was key. What did we need to do? We needed to set up infrastructure. And that really speaks to finances. Do we have the money? Because if you're going to set up infrastructure, which is basically a management team, you're going to lose money. So it doesn't make sense to have an area director or a well-paid manager in a province where there's only one center. It only makes sense if you're going to grow more, if you're going to have more, because you need to train that person, you need to get them sort of organized as to the ins and outs. And so we had to set up this big infrastructure across the country into the US long before we had the funding to support it. So we had to decide, so it was like a board decision. We had to decide, okay, we know we're going to lose money for a long time. We need this to set up infrastructure. So that's number one thing. Decide what you need, set it up, decide how you're going to fund it, and then what type of people are you going to look for? And so we spent a lot of time looking for a certain type of people, and those are mostly entrepreneurs. So people that wanted to work for a salary, but that had a real entrepreneurial instinct or edge, because we needed them to be out in the market, not complacent, not looking for constant guidance, making decisions, being able to back their decisions. I always say to people, I'd rather have you make a decision and be the wrong one than stand there paralyzed. Lots of cultures aren't like that. They want corporate, head office, whatever, to be involved in every decision. They want to have bureaucracy. For us, being high growth, we needed everybody working for us who were teachers to be entrepreneurial. So that was a real challenge, of course, because teachers tend to be kind, caring people and not necessarily entrepreneurial in nature.
Yes, that's a really good point. You've got quite a different skill match there, right? With the caring and the childcare and that professional, right, background, and then with the business side of it. So that's very unique. I also just wanted to point out, I really like your point about, your few points there, but knowing what you are and recognizing what you are, but then setting up infrastructure and knowing that you're going to lose some money in the first few years, and or for extended period of time, and outlining what that is. That's a hard one to take for a lot of people, especially entrepreneurial. You've got to have the funding, you've got to have the backing to do that. And I think this is why it's hard for a lot of larger organizations, because you're getting, I was involved in, you have growth targets, but sometimes you don't necessarily have the budget to invest. So tell us, I wanted to ask a little bit about that. So how did you navigate that to set up that understanding with your partners?
So it's a great question. It was really about being aligned with the vision. So, our idea of corporate childcare, a smart business person understands very clearly that, and as for being a Torontonian yourself, no one wants to have everything available in Toronto. And so it's very easy to understand if we would go to a company wanting corporate childcare, they would say, no, we can't just have it in Toronto because equity is so important to us. And Toronto tends to be the place where everything starts first. So we need to see this in Calgary and Vancouver. But those are big things, like to set up infrastructure in Vancouver, which is, 5 to 6 hours away from us, different time zone. It was a risk. It was a real risk. And that was more of an entrepreneurial risk. But, what we learned, and I guess one of the key messages for this conversation, is we learned that as we grew, we needed to be constantly changing. So what worked one year wasn't going to work the next year. So to give you an example, we constantly centralized and then decentralized. So we would think, okay, this is something that can be done out in the field, and then it wouldn't be working well for different reasons. People would feel like, orphan people, they'd say like, I feel like I'm an adopted child or an orphan. I don't feel like I'm connected to head office. And then we would think, okay, maybe we need to have this with a central leader in our head office so that they can report in and feel more connected than just to kind of be out doing. So to give you an example, we hired an HR person on the ground in Vancouver to just manage our team there, because we have 300 or 400 teachers, and the person wasn't happy because they were the only HR person there. They didn't feel that they had the support from head office, just because, again, time, distance, phone, not seen, and they floundered. They weren't successful. The woman wasn't successful. So now we replaced with a position, and all of our HR is all done. We probably have 10 or 12 people here managing the team out in the in the centers in the provinces, but it just seems to work better. But so that was a case of it being central, decentralized, back, trying things, changing. And again, that's part of the sort of leadership of a high growth. Part of the message is, don't think just because you've done something that it's going to be the right thing or it's going to stay that way. Be prepared to sort of admit mistake and defeat. The sooner you do, the better, always, right? Don't kind of go, oh, we've invested so much in this, we got to keep going. So that's sunk cost. And just evaluate by, checking in with your stakeholders and seeing how they're liking it. This person felt unempowered because she felt, so again, she was probably not the right fit. So we talk about fit and personality traits. We need someone who is naturally, so for us in a fast growing organization, we need someone who's naturally aggressive and naturally empowered and willing to sort of take risks and take ownership, and not be a person that if they fail feels that it's like a personal, I'm a failure, and just you failed with this action you did and we got to look at it. So a lot of it is mindset. And, to that end, one of my other tips is that we put in leadership coaching for our leaders. And so because, many of them are women that care deeply about their job. And we thought, if they would have somewhere to go and bounce ideas and feel that they had failed and be told, no, you didn't fail. You just, every day has failures and they just have to realign and keep going. And to be told that by an external person seems to be super helpful.
Great. Well, coaching is near and dear to my heart, so that's a good one.
And you were talking our HR leader. Yeah,
I wanted to comment a little bit about a couple things that you said. You mentioned it's really important to learn over time what needs to be centralized and decentralized. I think that's a very powerful thing. That's a very common thing for a lot of organizations, but I think probably specifically in high growth, that's one that you have to get your arms around. You talked about alignment as well, just going back to my original question around, how did you get additional funding for that? And you talked about the alignment of the purpose. I think that's, again, I talk about this all the time with leaders around being aligned with your key stakeholders and who, your board, who you report to, your senior leadership team, and not losing that alignment. It's so critical. So I didn't want to lose, I just wanted to remind people of that. And I loved your comment around, moving on, admitting defeat, not taking it too personally, just like getting on with it. Sometimes, as leaders, we beat ourselves up a little bit too much when we try something and it doesn't work. And I think what you're saying is, in a fast growth organization, you've got to let that go. That's just part of it. You got to just move. So if you could just point out, you said so many things here, but what type of leader you think succeeds in a high growth type? You have talked about some of them, but just pinpoint it down for us a bit.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And what I want to say, just to highlight your last comment, so interesting to us, some people have been very successful working remotely and others not so much. So it doesn't even tend to be the fact that we could say, okay, we can't have this functional spot, located abroad, like out of Toronto. We just have to have the right person doing it, and then it seems to be successful. The wrong person, not at all, right? So looking for those key, personality qualities. And so one of them is really someone who is constantly driving for more, not complacent. Because for us, we're pushing stuff out. And if there's someone that just wants to sort of rest every day, okay, I've done my stuff, they're not going to be aligned with us, because they're going to feel, so if you feel you just want to get the stuff checked off every day, you might want to work in a certain sector and you can get your checks done. For us, if you have the 10 things checked, we give you 10 more. And so if that's discouraging to you and you're like, oh, I just got my stuff checked, especially if you're remote and you're not feeling, because we have a lot of energy here at our head office, right? So people feel the energy of our growth and our new locations, our expansion, and they're like, yes, yes, yes. But if you're on your own and you're at your desk in your house and you're like, okay, I've done all my stuff. And like, okay, here's the next lot. It's easy to be discouraged if that's not your nature, which is I always want more. I always want to be the best. So a builder as opposed to, a nurturer or someone that's sitting is really key. And the other thing is the ability to make decisions. Because again, time distance not available. And we as a culture, we have a high level of customer service to all of our stakeholders. So not just our children that we care for, not just our teachers, but also our parents, but also like our internal people, at every level. And so if you're not a person that understands that high level of customer service and cares about the details, you're not going to do well. And so, it took us a while because, of course, at the beginning, in many respects, looking for people that had leadership experience in childcare, we would sort of take anyone that, seemed like they were lovely. But we learned, lovely wasn't enough. You also needed to have some of these core skills.
Okay, excellent. So that was really great about, excuse me, what type of competencies you need for people in high growth. But talk about the leaders. So do the same competencies apply to everyone, or for leaders like for yourself and other leaders in the organization? So we're thinking of leaders on the phone. Are they the same, or are there certain other competencies that you would think that are required for leaders?
Yeah. No, so it's a great question. I mean, it goes back to sort of my thoughts about our HR leader here. So as we grew, we had sort of a mid-range HR manager when we were a small company and then more. But as we grew, we realized we needed more leadership, and leadership seemed to come at, a higher wage and at, someone with more experience as an HR leader, a senior HR leader. And we wanted to have a VP of HR. And so we went out to market to look. And we had lots of options of people that had experience and were happy to come to a high growth organization and happy to, be involved. The problem was every single one we had, actually one worked really well, but most of them, the problem was that they had sort of moved on from being transactional. They'd moved on to caring about sort of the details because they've been elevated to a position where they were writing policy and executive compensation and dealing with reports to boards. And so for us, we don't really require that person to do that. We're sort of set up, we're pretty straight line, pretty easy to understand organization. We need someone to provide transactional leadership. And that was hard to get with someone that had been working because it's just sort of, how do you let someone go and why do you let someone go and how do we rate them up? But we needed that leadership. So it was difficult to find. And so what I say to people is that I'm really fortunate as the leader, the CEO, is that I have a great ability to sort of deal, we're doing acquisitions that are more than $20 million US. So large acquisitions, do sort of large blue sky thinking, and then have the ability to care deeply. So not, about very little tiny things that happen, every day in our world. And so it's that ability to sort of scale up and scale down, I think is a key for leaders, because again, we brought leaders in outside that have been accustomed to sort of really thinking like high level. I'm the manager, I've got all these reports in. They don't seem to want to go down to the bottom and you need to, again, when you're growing quickly, you need to be able to understand it all. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a combination. I mean, you have to have the execution to grow because you've got a lot of tasks that have to be repeated, but you also have to be agile, to move where you have to move. And I always was I'm a strong believer that leaders need to really understand their business at a detailed level. Right. So I understand that's a very, very good advice and very good value, I think, for people on the phone thinking about wanting to have that double-digit growth and maybe just checking themselves to say, how quickly can I zoom up, zoom down? How agile am I, right? And do I have people below me that can replicate that work quick enough, to scale?
And I always think like there's nothing that's too minimal for me to know about. I mean, I don't need to or want to or try to, but if someone's coming across, something that's coming across to me, I don't just look at it at an extremely high level and say, okay, you make the decision or that sounds right. I'll say to them, let's do a deep dive into this. I want to understand it fully. If I don't always, and it's me understanding that because I could be sending someone in the wrong direction. And I want to coach them through the process because, I mean, that's, I guess, the other skill that leaders of high growth companies need to have. The number one, which I should have started with, is the ability to be really strong coaches, because we're constantly coaching people to move from sort of where they are with what they're doing to the next level, which is managing more people, managing their people for growth, managing their people for difficult situations, managing the cross-border stuff. So they may start in one area. And, as you know, the story says, as an entrepreneur starting an organization, typically you don't, end with the talent you started with, because you grow out of them and then they have to leave and you get new professional managers in. And, we're Deloitte Best Managed Silver. We're hoping to be platinum. We'll know next week. And it was really something that I was never really thought we'd be able to achieve so much of the Best Managed, because the Best Management program is rigorous and it comes with a lot of stuff to do. And one of the things that I think has gotten us there is that most of our leadership team has worked for our company for 15 years around. So most of our leadership team started with us, stayed with us, and we've been able to provide the support, coaching, outside leadership, courses, management training, et cetera, to have them scale from, a very small company with, hundreds of thousands of dollars to one that has over $100 million worth of revenue. We've been able to get them there. And that's led to great success for us, I think.
For sure. So that kind of leads me to a question around the biggest challenges. You have shared some challenges. Perhaps one of the challenges you're going to share is the turnover, and you haven't had as much of that if you've retained your senior leaders. But tell us a little bit about what to look out for. What should leaders really watch for? Some of the challenge when they're in a high growth, year after year situation.
Well, I think the number one challenge is exactly what you said, is bringing someone in from outside. So you're not going to have everyone with you for a long time, right? So you're bringing in someone that has not grown up the company with you. And we've been relatively unsuccessful with that. I mean, we brought in a COO who's terrific, but we had probably 3 or 4 false starts, like the current COO we have, who wasn't well accepted. And part of it was the learning curve. Like, in this particular case, they were all men, but they didn't understand enough about our business quickly enough to have the support and recognition, and sort of buy-in, I guess, from the team, right? They were floundering in terms of the knowledge base. And so that, I think, is the number one challenge, is sort of bringing the right people in and having them scale up and having them accepted, and not, people being passive aggressive or leaving them out. So that would be and it could be more complex. The other thing on that same group message for high growth, a lot of times high growth, which is what we've been doing, are acquisitions. So a big challenge to sort of integrate the people that you acquire, like the leadership team, into your organization. And we've been, I would say, pretty successful, not perfect. Often the people will leave right away because they just, and that's something you hear, when you acquire a company that the leadership wants to be out. They always tell you they're going to stay in, and then you're stuck, with the secondary, third-dairy not being great. And so all of that has been good learning for us.
Okay, that's great. One thing I wanted to ask you about was how important is it culturally as you're growing, to keep the vision of your organization meaningful to people? Because when you're in high growth and you're hiring people fast and you're looking for executors and you want them to repeat tasks and build, you will have people that maybe don't understand. You're especially in your area with it, when it's childcare, and the core is so so precious and so important to what you're doing, and so personal, right? So how do you tie that in? How does that work? How do you keep the culture and the meaning of what you deliver front and center?
So interestingly, so the leadership team, which, myself being sort of, I would say, the most engaged in this here, are rigorous in terms of dealing with details. And I think what that does is it sort of sets the tone as a culture. We care. So we are a culture of caring. That's our key value, because we're looking after, over 10,000 children at any given time. And so we need families to know that we care about their children. So I need to care. I need to care about my team. I need to care about things that are going on in their life. I need to remember to ask them, how was last night, or what's happened, with your mom. So I need to show them that I care about them, and then I care about their concerns, and anything going on. And then hopefully, because that's, modeling, it seems to be one of the #1 ways, especially when you're working, people that are teachers and working with children, that can influence them. The other thing is when I go into a childcare center, I will be, oh, look, this mitten's on the floor. We need to make sure we keep the mittens together, showing that if I care about the mittens, you should too. And it was interesting because as we grew, people would say to me, you are way too involved in the minutiae, you're way too involved in the details. You shouldn't be. You should sort of take a big jump up and think more about, the business, the growth, the strategy, all the things that CEOs do. And I tell them the story about hearing Ted Rogers speak many, many years ago. And he, I don't know how big Rogers is, but huge company, obviously. And he was talking about how, if he was at a dinner party and someone said the cell service was lacking near their cottage, he would get up and phone, the current president and ask him to check into it and get back to me tomorrow. I want that fixed, that cell service fixed. And so can we, upgrade it or whatever? And so, and not because he cared so much about the person at the dinner party, all the other people that were around. And so I thought, well, we'll never be anywhere closely as big as Rogers. And so if Ted Rogers can do it, I can do it too. And so when I'm at a center and I see something that we're not happy with, I will follow through on making sure the action is changed. And it's not just that one thing, it's a message that shows that, because I care deeply about everything we do, hopefully our team will do the best they can.
Okay. That's important. You brought a smile to my face talking about the Rogers sector in Canada. Yes. But anyway, we'll move on from that. Yes. Speed. Tell me a little bit about how speed affects high growth. Just the speed of everything. I mean, it's kind of an underlying theme. Right. But I'm interested to know about how speed is a factor, just even in your communication with people. So maybe you could comment on that.
I think, again, great question. I think, again, it's very key to be very clear with, the people that are implementing change and growth and stuff, that you would rather have them make decisions, hope they're going to make the smart decisions, will have tolerance for the mistakes, rather than them being paralyzed. And so something that often happens is, there's sort of a block somewhere with a senior person and everything has to be approved. And then that stops the growth. And there's so many constant things happening. So, we'll have, values. We'll say, if it's anything under $1,000, you approve on the spot, you can make that decision. And if not, come to this person who we know is more accessible, and only come to me if it's that question. But Sandi, you've been with me many times and seen how much I'm responding to people and dealing with stuff. And it's because we expect people to be solving problems right away. And so if they need clarification or support, I expect to be able to give it to them right away. So my job is basically kind of like a person directing traffic, just making sure that I'm pushing for them to have the support. And because again, you can't turn around and say to your stakeholder, okay, we're going to open up 10 new locations this year, and then not give them the strategies to deal with it. And the strategies are solving constant little problems that come along. Like those strategies are how to solve those, basically.
Okay. And what are some, we're going to open it up soon to the Q&A and see if other people on the call have some questions. I've got one that's come in here, but I wanted to also just ask about that. What are some tips for people communicating up to leaders of an organization? So let's say we've got some leaders on here that might be reporting to a CEO. So they're leading, a large part of the company, but report to a CEO. How is it best to communicate to a CEO when you're moving fast?
It's a great question. Again, I tend to try to be really clear, and I'll think so. I always say to people, I love it when, you phone to go to a restaurant and make a reservation, and then they're like, okay, but when you come in, the door may look locked, but you have to pull harder. When you park, you may not see the sign, but walk 2 steps. And so they're sort of looking for, what you may have ahead, what you may have as your problem, thinking ahead. And so I try to do that when I'm communicating with my team, and I'll say, here's this, and this. When you're responding, leave me off, put so-and-so on. When you're responding, put all of us on. And so, I've heard the term, people that are not managing up well. And I was like, what does that mean? And when I inquired, they were like, not, letting the right people know, the senior people know about the actions or the outcomes. And so the people were wondering, what happened to that project? What happened to that? And so it was a good lesson for me when I heard it. And I thought, you know what, I need to be clear with people, because I often want to know, you know, what's happening with the building permit? Do we have occupancy? Have we started taking children? And so different things that may be happening because the centers are opening. So I'll say to people, you know, text me that, because I want to know right away. And I look at my texts more quickly than my emails, or email it to me and I probably won't respond, but I just want to know. And so when I'm discussing things with people, and again, you know, my mantra is always like conversation first, maybe then a phone call would be second, maybe a text is third, and email's like last resort. I try as hard as I can not to communicate with my team by email for all the reasons that you know. And for me, basically, is I miss nuances or I miss questions if I'm doing it by email. And there's always things that need to be addressed.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think that was very helpful for people. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to, is there anyone out there? Maybe you can get yourselves ready to unmute if you have a question that you'd like to ask Victoria, and I will ask. I've got one that's come in here already from the field. Is there anyone out there that wants to jump in now? They can unmute themselves. Okay. Quiet on all fronts there. I don't see anyone raising their hand. So I'm going to move on to the ones that have come in. So, so Victoria, one of the ones was, again, you've talked about some of this, but when people are listening here, and you've given us a lot of good advice, but what would you personally recommend for leaders that want to build a high growth organization? Okay, so they don't have one yet, but they want to build it. Can you just kind of give us a couple nuggets there?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that the thought is the most important thing. And I think, you know, entrepreneurs tend to be, so if you're going to build, you're probably entrepreneurial, tend to be more, you know, respond, react, you know, rash in your thinking. And I think having that sort of thoughtful pause to think, okay, so like what is it maybe going to look like, and what are the ups and downs, and what are the ranges, and who do I need, and how does it look? And then designing it. So, you know, as I say, for us, we've done that, and it's prevented us, I think, from, you know, making as many mistakes as we might have in terms of poor hires or people lacking the ability to make decisions. We've been very thoughtful about the growth. We were strategic. We knew what we wanted to do, and we planned it. I think, as I say, some entrepreneurs just fly by the seat of their pants. I speak to entrepreneurs all the time about sort of their successes and what they're doing, and I would say much harder and less chance to be successful if you aren't planning and thoughtful. And there's so much great books, like, you know, the Scaling Up books, and so much stuff to read that will help you with that. But that would be mine. And, you know, the first businesses I started when I was very young, I did not have any kind of plan for. And so I probably learned and was better with this one, that's for sure.
Okay, great. And I really liked something you said at the very beginning, in addition to being thoughtful, is to make a decision. Right, to make a decision that you want to do this and that you're going to do this. It's really important to know, right, to know what kind of business you want to lead, right, and which is great.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say, and don't, you know, people will often, and you know, young entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs sometimes tend to be, you know, the ones now, which is great, doing business. I think an older savvy entrepreneur, whether male or female, tends to be more resolute in, here's what's going to happen, here's what's going to work. I think if you're questioning what you're doing, then everyone else around you is going to question. And so often I'll say to people, you know, you need to decide. You can't be, you know, women, just because I do a lot of work with women entrepreneurs and different avenues, they'll come to me and say, what do you think of this? I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that. I say, you need to decide before you go out to the world, because if you have this indecisive feeling about you, your team's not going to follow you.
So true. So true. And you can feel it. Yeah. Okay. One final question, and then we'll wrap up. So how do you sustain yourself personally, and what do you recommend for other leaders that are in high growth or wish to be, to keep, you know, filling up their own cup, to be able to kind of keep up this speed and energy and enthusiasm, and to give so much to everyone else? So how do you do it?
You know what, it's interesting because now, of course, many years later, I've been an entrepreneur for 40 years. They talk a lot about self-care, which was not a word that I ever remembered before. But I think for everyone, you know, figure out what works for you. For me, it works for me to be always working. I find if I stop, it's hard for me to get back into it. So it's just, I'm better to have that constant flow. Some people need like lots of intense work and then a break. And not to feel guilty about sort of knowing and naming what works for you and saying, this is, I can, I like to work hard at night, but I don't want calls in the morning. So again, for me, I tend to be more moderate, and then I always want to be like not going 100 miles an hour, but always at 80. But if I, when I like check out, like then it's hard, as I say, for me to re-engage. So it's a happier mode for me. It's kind of like slow, steady running versus sprinting. It's a better thing for me personally. So everyone's got their own thing, and if they can sort of think about it and name it and not be at all ashamed or guilty about it, then that's great.
Okay, no, I like that. Everyone has to find their own rhythm. Yeah. And I think your rhythm is a light sprint.
I think that's good. Yeah. There you go.
Well, Victoria, it has been such a pleasure having you on the circle today. You've given us so much value and so much insight. It's just really great hearing your tidbits about high growth and what you've done with this great organization, Kids and Company, and with your team. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I think you're doing a terrific job with our leaders. We need all the help we can get. So thank you, Sandi.